The blades cut the morning sky like thunder, rattling the tin roof of my barn and sending dust devils spinning across the pasture. I had spent weeks preparing for this day, coordinating with state officials, mapping out a training exercise that would put my ranch and its wide-open fields to good use. The helicopter was not just any bird, it carried the governor himself, flying in to review emergency response drills for wildfire season. We had the state's blessing, federal oversight, and all the permits required. But none of that mattered when Karen, queen of the HOA, decided her petty authority extended to the very air above my land. I heard the shouting before I saw her. At the far end of the ranch road, a line of SUVs blocked the entry gate, hazard lights flashing like a cheap roadblock. Out stepped Karen, her floral blouse stretched tight, sunglasses perched low, her hand gripping a megaphone. Behind her stood 3 men in neon vests emblazoned with the words HOA security, as if a homeowners association had any right to field its own militia. She raised the megaphone to her lips, her voice screeching across the field. Unauthorized aircraft. You are in violation of HOA airspace regulations. Land immediately and surrender to community authority. For a moment, the absurdity nearly made me laugh. Airspace regulations? From an HOA, but the pilot, hearing her shrieks through his headset, wavered, circling wider, confused by the chaos below. My heart sank. Every second wasted in the air burned taxpayer money and embarrassed the state. I sprinted toward the gate, waving my arms, shouting for them to move. Karen turned on me with eyes full of venom. "This is trespassing," she hissed. "You didn't clear this with the HOA board. No flights, no drills, not on our watch." I shoved the deed in her face, my voice breaking with fury. "This is my ranch. The airspace above is federal. You have no jurisdiction." But she just sneered, the folds of her face trembling with rage. "The community voted," she barked. "We won't allow noise pollution, dangerous machinery, or your little power games." The helicopter thundered above, the governor's security detail visible through the windows, their eyes scanning the scene. One of the HOA security guards grabbed a flare and waved it toward the rotor wash, trying to signal the bird away. My chest tightened with horror. They weren't just obstructing, they were creating a hazard. One bad move and that helicopter could lose control. It was then that the twist came, the one Karen never saw coming. From the convoy of SUVs trailing behind the helicopter, a black Suburban peeled off and roared toward the gate. The door swung open, and out stepped a man in a crisp suit, earpiece coiled at his jaw. He flashed a badge so fast it made the HOA guards stumble back. "United States Secret Service," he barked. "Step aside now." Karen puffed up her chest, refusing to yield. "This is HOA property," she shrieked. "We don't recognize your authority here." Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. The agent's face hardened, and he gave a curt nod. Within seconds, 2 more agents emerged, and the so-called HOA security was disarmed and shoved aside. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to rally her troops, but for the first time, no one followed her orders. The helicopter finally touched down, rotor wash flattening the tall grass. The governor himself stepped out, his suit whipping in the wind, his expression thunderous. He strode straight toward Karen, his finger stabbing the air. "You jeopardized a state operation," he said, his voice low but carrying across the pasture. "You interfered with law enforcement. You obstructed emergency response. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Karen sputtered, her sunglasses slipping down her nose, her words collapsing into a pitiful whine. "We were protecting our rights. We were defending the community. You can't just..." But the governor cut her off with a wave of his hand. "I'll deal with you in court." The crowd that had gathered along the fence stood in stunned silence. For years, Karen had strutted through meetings like a tyrant, weaponizing bylaws against anyone who dared cross her. But now, in front of the entire community, she was being dismantled by powers far beyond her reach. Even her own allies shrank away, their eyes fixed on the ground, unwilling to meet her gaze. The deputies arrived minutes later, called in by the Secret Service themselves. Karen was cuffed, her floral blouse tugged awkwardly as she wailed, her voice echoing off the barns and hillsides. She screamed that it was all a misunderstanding, that she was framed, that I had tricked everyone. But her words dissolved into the roar of the helicopter lifting again, carrying the governor to safer ground, leaving Karen in the dirt where she belonged. That night, the story was everywhere. News crews replayed the footage of Karen waving her megaphone like a queen stripped of her crown, the governor glaring down at her with disgust, the HOA's neon-vested security, hauled away like children caught playing soldier. Social media erupted in laughter and outrage, memes of HOA Air Force spreading faster than wildfire. And me? I sat on my porch, exhausted, watching the lake shimmer under the moonlight, knowing my ranch had become the stage where arrogance finally met justice. Karen's screams carried long after the cuffs clicked shut, echoing down the gravel road like the wails of a child denied candy. The neighbors who had gathered around the fence didn't cheer or jeer. They simply stared, their silence louder than any applause. For the first time in years, the tyrant of the HOA had no audience to command, no stage to strut upon. And as the deputies loaded her into the cruiser, I realized this was not just the end of a stunt. It was the unraveling of her entire empire. By dawn, the story was on every local channel, then state news, then picked up nationally. Headlines flashed across screens. HOA president interferes with governor's helicopter. Video clips of her waving the megaphone and shrieking about HOA airspace went viral, spliced into memes, edited into parodies. One TikTok showed her with fighter jet sound effects, another with subtitles dubbing her as the commander of the Karen Air Patrol. It would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so dangerous. But the ridicule cut deeper than any fine or arrest warrant ever could. The fallout began swiftly. The governor, furious at the humiliation, ordered an investigation into the HOA itself. State auditors arrived with clipboards and grim faces, digging through years of budgets and meeting minutes. What they uncovered turned stomachs. Dues funneled into private retreats at luxury resorts, bogus security expenses that were nothing more than Karen's personal shopping trips, kickbacks from contractors who never finished their work. What started as obstruction of a helicopter spiraled into full-blown fraud and racketeering. Her board members turned on her like rats fleeing a sinking ship. One after another, they resigned, each trying to distance themselves from the mess. Paul, the HOA treasurer, went further. He walked into the sheriff's office with a box of evidence emails, bank statements, handwritten notes from Karen herself detailing how to manipulate votes and silence dissenters. His testimony sealed her fate. But Karen wasn't finished lashing out. Even behind bars awaiting trial, she tried to rally her followers, sending letters claiming she was a political prisoner, a victim of conspiracy between me, the governor, and big government. A few diehards still clung to her, muttering about unfair treatment, but most had seen enough. You can only scream witch hunt so many times before the villagers stop listening. The most dramatic moment came at her trial. She strutted in wearing a floral dress far too bright for the somber courtroom, her hair teased high, her face painted in defiance. She interrupted witnesses, shouted at the prosecutor, even tried to fire her attorney mid-hearing and represent herself. At one point, when drone footage was played showing her so-called security waving flares at the descending helicopter, she leapt from her chair and shrieked, "That's community defense! That's sovereignty!" The judge slammed his gavel so hard the echo rattled the walls. "Sit down, or you will be held in contempt," he thundered. When the verdict came, it was swift and merciless. Guilty on multiple counts of obstruction, fraud, misuse of funds, and reckless endangerment. The sentence was years, not months. She collapsed into her chair, her once proud shoulders sagging under the weight of reality. The floral prints and loud speeches couldn't save her now. The HOA dissolved in the aftermath, dismantled by court order. The properties it once lorded over were returned fully to their owners, the bylaws shredded like the paper they always were. The neighbors who had once trembled under Karen's threats now breathed easier. Some cried openly, confessing they had lived in fear of fines, liens, or public shaming for years. Now that fear was gone. But the governor didn't forget. At a press conference held weeks later, he spoke not of the embarrassment or the chaos, but of the lesson. When people abuse small positions of power, he said, his eyes blazing into the cameras, they threaten not just individuals, but entire communities. We must never allow tyranny to take root, not even in the smallest corners of our lives. His words struck like fire, and the room erupted in applause. He looked at me then, nodding, and I knew that my ranch had become more than a backdrop for drills. It had become a symbol. Life returned to normal in its way. The helicopters came back, this time welcomed. Their drills conducted smoothly without interruption. The pasture healed, the fences stood tall, and the gate bore a new wooden sign carved by Miguel, my neighbor. This land stood firm. Neighbors gathered more often now, not for forced HOA meetings but for potlucks, barbecues, and late-night fishing on the lake. Freed from Karen's chokehold, the community began to look like one again, not a kingdom ruled by fear. And me? I felt lighter than I had in years. Sometimes at dusk, I sit by the barn, watching the last light paint the horizon, and I think of the day she tried to halt a rescue helicopter carrying the governor. It's almost too absurd to believe, and yet it happened, proof of how far entitlement can twist a person. And so I leave you with this: was I right to stand firm against her obstruction, to let the confrontation play out in the open until the truth swallowed her whole? Or should I have tried, somehow, to find compromise with a woman who never believed in compromise herself? Tell me, where would you draw the line when arrogance endangers not just your peace, but the safety of others?